Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just listening to the conversation, a couple points. I look forward to Senator Braun's point to having a budget debate. President Biden's budget will arrive here in Congress soon. He's indicated that his budget will reduce deficits over 10 years by $2 trillion. So I look forward to alternative proposals from the House or otherwise on that important issue. Second, you know, I was listening to some of the comments by Dr. Lewis. I think it'd be important to know that in the most recent hearing we had in this Budget Committee on climate change, it was some of our Republican colleagues who said that they didn't like the Inflation Reduction Act because they wanted to approach the issue of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by putting a price on carbon, something that I, too, support, and of course puts the burden on those who are the polluters in dealing with that, what economists call externality that impacts everybody else, as you know. So those were statements from some of our Republican colleagues just in the last hearing. I would like to say a word about China, who actually has a 10-year lead on the United States when it comes to investment in the batteries that are used for storage for electric vehicles. They process more of the critical minerals that go into electric vehicle batteries. They produce a lot of them. And given the fact that there's a growing market for that, I would hope that we wouldn't want to fall behind China, whose 10-year plan more than 10 years ago said that one of their #1 priorities was to be the dominant world player when it comes to clean energy. You know, we're talking about having to address the costs now of doing nothing, right? The costs of emissions that are having impacts in sea level rise and other areas. And so I want to start by thanking you, Ms. Michaud, for sharing your experiences about how you in Rhode Island have been navigating issues of sea level rise. In my state of Maryland, we're experiencing lots of costs and impacts from climate change and sea level rise. There's a small town in Kent County, which is on Maryland's eastern shore. It's called Betterton. It was once a really thriving little town. The Baltimore to Betterton beach ferries went back and forth from the city of Baltimore to this town. But right now, they're having to spend $1 million to protect just 10 homes from literally falling into the bay. And the homeowners are putting in some, but so are public entities putting in some because this cost was no fault of the homeowners. That's expensive. Can you just talk to the issues you're facing when it comes to a small town trying to fight the growing costs of climate change?
Sure, thank you for the question. I mean, I believe Warren is similar to many small towns around the country in that we have increasing needs, not just climate related, but also social related and economic development related, and it's a very tough competition for the small amount of funds that we have. So again, we are spending considerably to protect our coastal features and our coastal facilities, but sometimes it is at the expense of other items, such as social services or education or other infrastructure improvements that are needed that aren't in the coastal areas. So it's certainly a concern. You know, as I said, we are very small. The town hall in Warren, we have 14 employees from the custodian to myself, and I think that we are not dissimilar to many other communities that have limited resources and limited staff to deal with those problems.
It sounds like the same challenge being experienced by a lot of these towns on Maryland's eastern shore. Dr. Becchetti, in your article entitled "Life's a Beach," you note that a large share of homeowners' wealth is locked up in their equity in their homes, and that the Union of Concerned Scientists has also published a report called Underwater, which I know you're familiar with. That report, the Union of Concerned Scientists report, estimates that nearly 2,500 homes in Somerset County, Maryland, which is another county on Maryland's eastern shore, with a market value, the 2,500 homes with a market value of $200 million are at risk of chronic flooding in 2030. Can you just speak to the impact of lost property values due to in coastal communities like Somerset. This is just one small area. You magnify that across our state of Maryland, across the country. Can you just speak to the magnitude of this challenge?
Well, it's a particularly difficult challenge because if we look back to the housing crisis of 2007, it was a long time before property values came back, but they did come back. But this is a different type of dynamic where property values are probably physically not able to come back. And so this is equity that's lost forever. It was extremely difficult to estimate all this nationally. I don't know. I'm not sure I have enough zeros to do it. But there's a real struggle and a real challenge of figuring out for the most severely impacted properties that are not savable, what will be the appropriate policy.
No, I appreciate that. I see my time is up, but I think one of the purposes of this and other hearings is just to underscore the costs of inaction and doing nothing, which is why it was so important that we got started with things like the Inflation Reduction Act, but much more work ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.